Welcome in that Bernier Show, November the 3rd. It's a Thursday. We're a day earlier than normal. Normally you catch us on DRF Live. Obviously, this isn't on DRF Live. This is on Spreaker. It'll go up on YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, DRF.com, all the other ways. You just don't get the live video. I'm here, joined by the DRF Players Podcast, Mike Hogan, Peter Thomas Fornatale, Jonathon Kinchen. We're a little bit late to get going because technology, as good as it is, it can occasionally be a pain in the rear end, so we have some issues with that this morning, but we're up and going. It's 8:15 on the West Coast. Before I bring you boys in, and this will be the first talking point, we have breaking news that Lord Nelson has been scratched from the Breeders' Cup Sprint. I believe he got a cut, and he got infected, and at the end of the day, he's not going to run Saturday. So we talked about the Sprint yesterday. That was the last race we talked about on the DRF Players Podcast. Now he's out of this. Before we dive into the pick six on Saturday, let's start with Pete. Your overall assessment. Lord Nelson's gone.
Well, it's kind of funny. I was warming to him a little bit, Matt. Your enthusiasm being part of the reason, speaking to some other friends as well. It's a tough thing handicapping these Breeders' Cup races, not only because they're difficult races, but because of as much as I appreciate having all the time to think about them, sometimes I worry you get into these situations of you think long, you think wrong, and I'm going to try over the course of the next 24 hours while finalizing my thoughts on these races to really go back to the converse of that first thought, best thought, and try not to let too much information and too much of the last-minute stuff affect me. So in a way, I'm grateful probably that a horse I didn't initially have in the numbers on the top of my page, I don't have to concern about. So selfishly, there's that.
Mike Hogan, before we go to you, we need to take care of the housekeeping. I forgot to bring this up at the top of the show. This Matt Bernier Show is brought to you by our friends at ExpressBet. ExpressBet, your way to play. We got to get the housekeeping underway. We got to pay the bills, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Mike Hogan, overall thoughts, Lord Nelson out of the Sprint.
Well, it's a little sad because we talked about how it's maybe not the most exciting of races, at least from my standpoint. And that's a horse that was going to take a lot of money. And, I thought maybe wasn't going to be as big a player as he was going to get bet. Now that money's going to get redistributed to some of the other likely contenders. And it pulls the price on everybody. Like I said yesterday, I think Masochistic is probably the most likely winner, but I don't really trust him. And now I'm going to get a shorter price on a horse that I completely trust. So just probably means I skip the race entirely.
Jonathon Kinchen, change anything for you with the defection of Lord Nelson?
No, just the fan part of me is a little bit bummed out. I think that his participation was going to make it a better race, and unfortunately, with him being out, like Mike said, the prices of horses that you did like are going to be a lot less than you would like them to be. It's one of the most exciting races every year, and the fact that it's scratched down to what now, 7 horses? Is that right?
It's a 7-horse field in the Breeders' Cup Sprint.
It's a little bit. It's just sad from a fan perspective, but there's going to be a race 35 minutes after that, and 35 minutes before I'll be all right.
That's just spoken like a true diehard gambler. So now that we've gotten into the sort of swing of things after our technical issues and whatnot, the Matt Bernier Show brought to you by ExpressBet. ExpressBet, your way to play. Yesterday on the DRF Players Podcast, we went over the first 7 races of Breeders' Cup weekend. Now we're going to dive into the pick 6 on Saturday. It kicks off in race number 7. Let's go right to that. It's the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. It's always a wide-open affair. And I feel like most people talk about the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile and how it's meant to be run around a one-turn mile. I feel like the Turf Sprint is meant to be run here at Santa Anita, down the hill, 6.5 furlongs. Let's start with you, Jonathon. This is a wide-open race. Where are you looking here? And as far as any multis are concerned, how deep do you need to go to feel comfortable to get through?
Well, I think you need to go pretty deep. I think this is one of the hardest races to nail down a selection. There's a horse in here. Well, there's 2 horses really, but there's a horse in here I'm really anxious to bet, and will be heavily involved in everything that I'm doing, and that's obviously. I'm a huge proponent for horses that show speed, going long, going a mile, going longer than that. Maybe even a situation where you have horses that are going to pull. Obviously, he's not really a puller, but he goes so darn fast going 2 turns that I love horses like that coming down the hill. They usually cross the dirt close to the front and have finish left off of that cutback. And so he's a horse that I've always thought down the hill would be dangerous, and what a cool horse he is. The other horse I'm really excited about getting involved with a little bit is Ohm. He fits that profile a little bit more of kind of a horse that is always in position going 2 turns, and he's forward in those situations. His run is just always dull, just a little bit too dull, and I think that'll be solved by coming down the hill. And so, and he's drawn much better than obviously too. So those are 2 horses that I'd definitely be interested in. And what, for the sake of conversations, I won't have pick 5s, pick 4s, things like that, wherever's connected here, without using Celestine as well.
Mike Hogan, where do you go in this race?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I mean, I'm kind of with Jonathan in that generally my approach to this race is I like horses with proven form down the hill at Santa Anita. That makes Ambitious Brew one that for me will be definitely used on all of my tickets. But I do think it's a spread race. I don't think you can get through here or feel comfortable about getting through here with less than 3 or 4 horses, maybe even more. I'm generally against the Europeans. I realize this might be a better crop that they're sending over than what they've sent over for the Turf Sprint in the past. But I'm just not sure about them, and I think at the price that they're going to be, I'm most likely going to let them beat me. For me, it's Ambitious Brew and then some of the cutbacks that Jonathan mentioned, primarily, obviously, a lot in Celestine. Generally against Ohm, largely because of Dan Hendricks down the hill and cutbacks down the hill. He doesn't really. It's kind of not really a strong suit. I think this is more of a we didn't get into the other race, so let's try it in here. Whereas with obviously, I really like to see him down the hill. I think this could be where he actually excels.
Peter Thomas Fornatale, Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. Where do you go? Who do you like?
Some good cases being made so far by the crew, but I'll talk about another one a lot who I've heard some positive chatter about in terms of that he's supposed to be working well. He just makes a lot of sense on form. This seems like the kind of thing, looking through the lines of the PP, is the type of task that a lot will relish. Looking at that last race between being compromised by the flow, I think there's a lot of reasons for a lot to run a lot better here. Didn't mean to say a lot 6 times in that sentence. Also nicely drawn outside. I think a lot of things could work out for him.
We haven't discussed one of my favorite. That's the inside runner, the one pure sensation. We call him the inside runner. He's drawn the 1 post. He'll actually be farthest outside of the first turn, going right-handed. Yay or nay on pure sensation, rapid fire? Pete will go opposite direction.
Absolutely love the horse as a horse. Have backed the horse on numerous occasions, some successfully, some not. Just not sure that the 6.5 configuration suits what he wants to do, really, and not sure that I need a shortish price in what appears to be a deep and competitive race. Wouldn't argue with anybody who wanted to save.
Hogan.
Completely agree with Pete. Love the horse. Don't think this is the right spot, and also hate the rail down the hill.
JK.
Not from the rail, not going 6.5, not with these horses finishing at him.
I like it. For what it's worth, I like Ohm over Celestine in this spot. Let's move on to race number 8, the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. You've got a field of 11 in here. This is obviously one of the big races, not just for this weekend, but going forward, because clearly these horses are hopefully going to be on the Triple Crown Trail. It's also worth noting, correct me if anyone knows and I'm wrong, but I believe it's 50 points for the winner of this race toward the Kentucky Derby. So in a way, this is a mini win and you're in if you can stay sound over the next 6 months. Let's start with Peter Thomas Fornatale. Pete, this is a very interesting race. You can go a number of ways, a lot of highly promising horses anyway. As far as prospects are concerned, where do you go?
Well, my top pick I'm going to let Jonathan talk about, and instead I'll just talk about one of the ones I'm going to be backing up with, and that's number 4, Theory. I've talked about it in some of the webinars we've done this week. Mike Hogan and I were there watching the Futurity just a couple of weeks ago and sort of elbowing each other after the race. Hey, look at that gallop out. Very impressive. Looked like a horse who had more to give and will accomplish more. Very unusual to see Pletcher coming back in that amount of time. I get that, but I think he's just going to get a terrific trip, and I think at the price, I think you're going to get a decent price. Pletcher's had amazing success at the Santa Anita Breeders' Cups before. this could be the whole show for theory, as opposed to some of these horses thinking about a target the first Saturday next May.
Mike Hogan, where do you go in the juvenile?
You know, we talked a little bit about Songbird yesterday and being lightly raced, or not lightly raced, but being somewhat unchallenged and now facing older, being tested for class. I hinted there's a horse like that in the juvenile, and that's number 6, 3 Rules. The difference between the two, I see some comparisons. Of course, 3 Rules is not a champion. Of course, 3 Rules is not a graded stakes winner. I get that. He's been beating up on much lesser at Gulfstream, but he's been doing it the way you want to see horses beating up on lesser. He's been unchallenged. He looked good. This is not a horse that I think is only a one-turn horse. This is not a horse that I think is just a Gulfstream runner. I think he's got some talent here, and the nice thing is you're going to get a nice price on him because a lot of people are going to doubt the quality and the ability. But he could very well just be fastest early, or maybe he sits off a Syndergaard, and I think he could take them a long way at a big price, or maybe he's not good enough. But I'm very curious to see what he'll turn out to be.
Am I the only one that gets a Hanson vibe from this horse? Looks very good. He's brilliant, but he's untested or unproven against quality competition. Isn't this the same sort of scenario that we saw with Hanson when he went and beat Union Rag?
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, and you know, Pete mentioned Pletcher in the juvenile, and all that in the juvenile fillies. Pletcher in Breeders' Cup dirt juvenile races, he's 2 for 30. The 2 wins were Uncle Mo at a short 7-5, Shanghai Bobby at 6-5. He's had 15 horses not win at odds of 5-1 or less. He tends to get overbet because he's a name. And here you've got Jose Pinchen coming in with an undefeated horse who wins by open lengths every time, and you're going to get a good price on him. By all means, sign me up.
Jonathon Kinchen, I think I know where you're leaning in this spot. You may or may not have a future wager on him. What do you like in the juvenile?
Well, I have to say that when Mike mentioned 3 Rules, he said he might relax. I think that 3 Rules, I think there's a better shot that 3 Rules relaxes than me not having a drink at the Eddie Logan today. So,
well, he sat third before. He's not been on the lead every race, you know. So,
but he's been going 6.
Sure,
he's going to. They're going to fly in this race, and unfortunately, Matt, I think that your pick is going to be a little bit compromised because of that. Yeah, I mean, look, I obviously have the future on not this time, but I think the horse is talented. And that's why I had the future, just from what I'd heard about the horse before that. If you watch the tape at Churchill, I mean, you can't be, you can't not be impressed by the running of that race. For me, it's him and Classic Empire. I'll use a little bit of theory as well, but Classic Empire and not this time. I think that the juvenile is going to go back to the great state of Kentucky.
That's the same way that I have this race. I went not this time. I think he's been brilliant in both of his 2 sort of route starts. If you consider that maiden score at Ellis a true route, he went about 1.5 turns. The blinkers going on Classic Empire seem to have sharpened him up. I do love Gormley, and I think that's what Jonathan was alluding to. I think he just looks like a quality racehorse, the way that he moves over the racetrack. Pace-wise, it will be interesting to see where he's positioned. I can't imagine that he's going to clear off or go to the lead. I think ideally they want him to sit, and I think they planned on sitting. And the front runner had all the issues not happen at the beginning of the start, you know, where Straight Fire was compromised. He was floated wide and couldn't get to the front. It'll be interesting to see how the entire race is run. Overall, before we get off this race, thoughts on the inside 2 runners. You have Klimt and Syndergaard. Jonathan, either one of them do anything for you?
The draw for Klimt, I've always been against Klimt. I mean, we've talked about it on the podcast before. He's one of those anti-pet horses for me, where just like if he's running, I'm betting against him. So I'm not going to change that now. And I don't like the draw, and I wasn't crazy about the last race. Syndergaard, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I'm completely against Syndergaard. I'm completely against Practical Joke. I felt like they were where you wanted to be on the track that day, and the jump up in figure should suggest that that's the truth. And I think Syndergaard's ultimately going to be a really good sprinter. The pace scenario does him no good as well. So that's why I've kind of gone with the outside horses that I think can rate and finish.
Mike, what say you?
Yeah, I agree with Jonathan. I think Syndergaard is a sprinter, and maybe after this race is when they'll realize it. Klimt, maybe I like him a little bit better, but Bob Baffert, Santa Anita, I think he's going to be a little overbet. I don't think he's as likely a winner as he's likely to equate to in terms of the actual odds. I think there's better value elsewhere.
Pete, where do you stand on the inside too?
Klimt makes perfect sense. He's not really didn't crack my short list. Wouldn't fight with any betting partner who wanted to include. And I could probably, even though I feel similarly lukewarm about Syndergaard, could probably be talked into him as the one I think who will be on the lead. You made the point before, Matt, comparing Three Rules and Hansen. I mean, to me, the biggest difference is that Hansen, going into that race looking at pace figures, was always going to be on the lead, whereas I think it is Syndergaard who's going to be on the lead here. And could I see a Shanghai Bobby Redux scenario? Sure, I could. I just think I'm going to find a little bit more value elsewhere, going with stablemate theory and also Not This Time, who I believe to be the best closer and probably the best horse in the race.
Let me ask you guys this question. Who do you think is going to be favored?
I would say it's going to be a really. I mean, I guess it's going to be one of the Kentucky horses. That's a really good question.
I'll go with Not This Time. I think Not This Time will be the favorite.
Really? Okay.
Maybe. Yeah, and I have to be honest. I think he's going to be a rather clear favorite.
Okay.
I think he may be 2-1.
Yeah, I think you're right. I guess maybe just I was so impressed by Classic Empire's last race that I feel like the world should be impressed with me. But yeah, I think you're right. Probably Not This Time.
It seems the way that everyone is talking, and don't quote me on the number, but when you take a look at the Sunday edition of the Daily Racing Form with the picks from all the handicappers, I want to say maybe 3/4 of us picked Not This Time. So I just feel like this is the kind of horse that everyone knows he looks good. And it almost, I was talking to Bob Newmeyer about it yesterday. He brought up the idea, isn't it one of those things where it just seems almost too good? Like he looks too good, and now you're at a short price in the biggest race of his life across the country. And, look, from a wagering proposition, he may not be a good bet, but I think he's the most likely winner. It'll be very interesting to see how everything shakes down in race number 8, the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Let's move on to race number 9. It's the Turf. This is the third leg of the pick 6. This is the kickoff leg of the late pick 4. It's got a giant guaranteed pool. You can find all that info on drf.com and breederscup.com. It's a 13-horse field. I shouldn't say that. Scratch 1. The outside runner is a 13. Metaboss has been retired. He pulled up with an injury yesterday in training. So you have a field of 12. Is it as simple as the top 3 and everyone else, or can you make a case for some sort of a wacky horse? When I say the top 3, it's the 2 Aidan O'Brien horses, Highland, Real and Found, and Flinster for Chad Brown.
Well, at first glance, the Irish seem to have this one in a hammerlock. They've got, I think, the best pace horse in Highland Real, and they've got on paper the best closer in Found. But I think of my friend Frank Scatoni's words when I think about Coolmore's participation in this race. Why enter 2 when 1 will do? And it gives me, between that, just that sort of vibe and the shortish prices, it makes me want to get clever. Now, Flincher isn't terribly clever. He's been laid out for this all year. I think you can forgive the last effort. I think this is much more what he wants to do, and he'll be in there. But the price horse, and I hope he'll be a price horse, the connections, it's one of these tough situations where connections alone could see him take a lot of money in our markets. Sir Michael Stout and Dettori. One of my English friends scoffed at me when I suggested Ulysses as a possible win candidate. He just got beat at Windsor, and he's taking on the top 2 from the Arc. No thanks was sort of the response. And that's not crazy. But speaking of a horse who I think this has been the goal for a while, we got a trainer who knows what it takes to win this race. One of the preps, Ulysses won, was also one of Conduit's races along the way to get tasting Breeders' Cup Turf glory. I think he wants to go left-handed. I like him on the tape. He's progressive. He's improving. If we can get 12-1, 15-1, I could see putting at least some money in Ulysses' corner here.
Mike Hogan.
I think it's the big three. For me, I'm kind of with Pete. I prefer Flincher over the 2-8 O'Brien runners. But they make sense, and I wouldn't be surprised if Highland Real or Found wins. But this whole we're going to the Classic, we're going to the Turf, it kind of makes me doubt the chances of both of them for a lot of the reasons that I think Pete was mentioning. For me, the long shot that interests me a little bit is partly a pace play. I know people have talked about Ecto being on the lead, but, the only time he's been on the lead in North America was last out when he kind of inherited the lead. It was a short field. There was nobody else that was really likely to go, and he took them on the lead in relatively slow fractions. I think it's just as likely that Ashley Love Sugar is maybe controlling the pace here. This is a horse who likes Santa Anita. This is a horse who likes the distance. This is a horse who seems to be in career form. I don't know if he's more I certainly don't think he's more likely than Flincher or some of the others, but at the price he's going to be, I think he could take them a long way. Wouldn't be shocked if he wins, and certainly wouldn't be surprised at all if he hits the Tri or the Super.
JK, what do you got?
Pete, you sitting down?
I'm here in a chair, indeed.
Oh, okay. I spent an hour, and I haven't told you this yet. I spent an hour and 20 minutes last night talking to reigning NHC champion Paul Matisse, just going through the races, and he made a very interesting point for Ecto and suggested that if that horse runs the same race he ran at Belmont, that he can win this race. He got me thinking that because of him being on the lead, I kind of – it helped me confirm the pick that I wanted to make, which is Highland Real. I think Highland Real is going to be on the lead, and I think Highland Real is going to win this race. I'm against Found. The amount of racing in the month of October is a little bit much for me, and obviously she did it with some success last year. But she's more of a grinding type of filly with stamina, a mile and a half stamina being her advantage, and I think that's going to kind of play against her at this course against these horses, and so it's definitely going to be Highland Real for me, but I will be using a little bit of Ecto underneath. Paul convinced me pretty well.
I like Highland Real as well. I don't know that he's going to be on the lead. I feel like Ashley Love Sugar has to go to the front, but at any rate, I think Highland Real parks just off of his flank, and I think that's the difference tactically. He gets the jump on Found, he gets the jump on Flincher. I guess if I was the three, if I needed to take a stand against any of them, it would be Found. I prefer Flincher, and I prefer, obviously, Highland Real on top. Again, that was the kickoff leg of the late pick 4. This is the third leg of the pick 6. Let's move on to race number 10, the Matt Bernier Show, joined by the DRF Players podcast, presented by Express Bet. Express Bet, your way to play. The 10th race, the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint. Bit of an odd placement for this race as far as its historical context is concerned. On Breeders' Cup Saturday, this has not been one of the more prolific races with the best horses. That's not to knock a Groupie Doll or anyone else, but this is a race usually much earlier on a Saturday, rather than being in the heart of the biggest wagers on Saturday afternoon. But that being said, this is a wide-open race, and I think that's the only reason that it is placed in this position. Jonathon Kinchen, where do you go in the 10th race, the Filly and Mare Sprint?
I'll tell you what, this is one of those races where people keep talking about it. They have been talking about it all week, and I just keep saying, I don't really have an opinion. It's more of like a cop-out because it's such a darn hard race to handicap. Ultimately, I still don't really know exactly what I'm going to do, but I will say this. If someone would guarantee me that Karina Mia would go to the front, which I think she could go to the front, then that would be my pick, and I would think she'd be the most likely winner. I think that she's always wanted to obviously do this. Her biggest races have come with, in a one-turn situation, the 8 Bells. I thought she ran actually sneaky good in the Ballerina, thanks to Pete and Duke Matisse kind of pointing out the fact that, yes, the first quarter seemed slow, but the second quarter was really fast. And so, and it's kind of reminded me a little bit about, like Pete said, about American Pharoah in the Travers last year. It looked like that first quarter was slow, but then he ran that crazy middle quarter. So it's Karina Mia for me. I just hope that Julian will ride this horse aggressively. If not, I guess the only price play that I'd be interested in would be Finest City.
Mike Hogan.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you, Matt. This is here because this is probably, along with the Turf Sprint, the most wide-open Breeders' Cup race that we're going to see Friday or Saturday. And I'll challenge you guys, if any of you want to take this up, any one of these 13 runners, give me a name, I'll make a case that they could win. Because I think that's as wide open as it is, which is no knock on the favorite. I mean, Have You Gone Away is a deserving favorite because she's in career form. Tom Morley has done great work with her. She's coming off of a nice win in the Ballerina. But I don't think she has a huge edge over any of these. And so, I would go as deep as you possibly could. And the huge long shot that I might be willing to try and get into the exactas and tries. Well, first I should say, I think that Phil D'Amato's horse, what's her name? Glory Zapper. Glory Zapper. Yeah, I think she might be on the lead, or at least close to it. I think she is probably the one that presents the most value, at least if you can get anything close to that morning line. For me, but the huge, ridiculous long shot that I kind of like in this one is Wonder Gal. And if you go through her races, this is a filly who had a lot of talent, then had some issues, was laid off for a long time, ran a huge race, admittedly against much weaker at Saratoga, and then frankly either bounced or just hated the mud last out in the Gallant Bloom, did very little running. Leah Giamatti does much better first off a layoff, second off a layoff, not so well. Third off layoff, much better. I expect her to bounce back. I don't know if she's as good as that 100 buyer we saw at Saratoga, but she's certainly better than the 30-1 and better than the mid-80s buyer. This is a horse now making third start off a long layoff, just a 4-year-old who showed talent, and maybe she's good enough here.
Absolutely. One, how do you think the race goes, and who do you like? But two, also, and we'll double back to those boys, how do they get bet this race?
I actually have a contrary view to Mike. At first glance, I did think it was a competitive and open race. The more I look, the more I just want to get tied on to Karina Mia and Have You Gone Away, who I think should get good trips. I like the idea of having the best of the speed horses in here and the horse with the best closing kick. I could see, not for a huge part of my bankroll, but for most of my involvement in this race, just trying to get away with those two, whether it's doubles, whether it's a Dutch win bet, or some sort of anchor in the late pick. So that's how it's going to be for me, Matt.
How do you think they're going to bet the race, Pete?
Well, I think those two horses are going to probably take money. I think they'll be significantly toward the bottom of the market. I'm probably not the only one seeing those very obvious attributes. I get that. But that's, again, why I think, not a huge play, but just anchor it down with those two where a lot of people, the picks particularly, might be where you get value in this race. I could see the more efficient win market, maybe betting them down below where I would want to take them, or at least put them to where I think their chances are. But I think that I think when it comes to the picks, maybe you can get a little bit of juice even relying on favorites here.
And the reason I ask that, and we'll send it to Mike and Jonathan, I look at this morning line. I just can't imagine that Paul Silver Lining is actually going to go off at 10-1. I can't imagine that Wonder Gal is anywhere near 30-1. And that's not to knock this morning line, because this is a brutal race to try to make a line for, but I can't imagine those horses being nearly that high, and that means someone's going to need to move back if they're all going to come down. Mike, how do they bet the race?
I think Wayville Avenue moves up. Sure, she's your defending champion in the race, but I'd be surprised if she's 6-1 against this field. She's not in the same form as she was last year when she came in and won this race, and I bet she moves up a little bit. And I wouldn't be surprised if Chad's other filly, Iris Jasper, is actually shorter in the wagering than she is, coming off of that nice win at Keeneland. I think Karina Mia is probably your favorite. The way that they bet her in the Ballerina, and even though it wasn't a ridiculous early pace, that second quarter sped up quite a bit, and she was maybe
said that.
Yeah, exactly. So she was maybe the one that was against the pace in that one. I think a lot of people are going to see that. I think she's going to take more money than Have You Gone Away, and I think she could be 2-1. So I think that's your favorite, but you're right. It's hard for me to try and get a handle on who's going to get bet, who's going to get overlooked. I think some of the longer shots are going to be much bigger than 20-1. Paola Queen, Gomo, and Spelling Again, I think are going to be probably higher than Wonder Gal.
Jonathan, are you in agreement with those two?
Yeah, I'm pretty much everything Mike said. I think that Karina Mia will probably be. I think the favorite. She'll be the favorite. I think the favorite will be about 3-1. I get have you gone away from a handicapping perspective, but from a betting perspective with Tom Morley, I just don't see that horse getting bet down like ridiculously. Just based on that. So, yeah, I mean it's an interesting race, that's for sure. But I would say Karina Mia will be the favorite.
I agree that Karina Mia will be the favorite. I went with Terrace Tango in this spot on the turnback for Hollendorfer. This is basically his specialty. You look over the past 5 years, graded stakes. Philly going route to springs 5 for 9 with a giant ROI, so I'll take a shot with Terrace Tango. She's 8 on the line. I think I'll probably get around 6. Let's move on to race number 11. That's the Grade 1 Breeders' Cup Mile. You could make the argument, the exception of the distaff, this might be the most enticing and exciting race of the weekend from a quality standpoint and just from a wide open standpoint. Jonathan, you look at this, you got a field of 14 signed on in here. You got basically everyone that you could have hoped for in this spot. One, let's start with Tepin, the reigning champion, the queen of this entire division. Is she as good as she was at the beginning of the year and last year at Keeneland? And two, if not her, then who?
I think she is. I think she's we talked about it. I don't know. I talked about it somewhere. Maybe it was with Vic, but she has not been forced to be cranked this year. They know what they have. They know they have a great horse. I would say the only race this year that she was actually like cranked up for was the race at Ascot, and she won. So it's like everyone's saying, well, she's not as good as last year. Well, there's no. This is the race that they've been pointing for. So I would imagine she'll be cranked up. I'd imagine she'll be ready to run. I would think we'll get her best performance. I think a lot of people are going to try to play against her, and I think you're going to actually get a fair number on her based on her last performance. So for me, it's her and Alice Springs. I think they're going to absolutely fly in this race, and I think that Tepin's kind of always wanted that, someone to kind of go on with it. She can sit off a little bit. What Have You, Photo Call, Midnight Storm are going to heat things up, and I think that Alice Springs or Tepin will pick up the pieces.
Mike Hogan, is Tepin the same filly? And if she is, or if she isn't, who is it?
I don't think she is. I mean, maybe she is. Maybe she's just a step slower. Even if she is, I think this is a tougher field than what she faced last year. You've got a lot of horses that are in really good form. Mondialise, for whatever reason, did not choose this race. I think he would have been a player had he done so. He ran second to her last year. Grand Archer in third. These horses are better than Grand Arch and a lot of who else she beat last year. And even a horse like Tourist, who she handled quite easily, I think is in better form this year than he was last year. So I think it's wide open. I absolutely respect her. I think she's a legitimate favorite, and I wouldn't be shocked if she wins. But from a betting standpoint, I'm going to take a shot against her. I think Alice Springs makes sense, but I think she'll also take quite a bit of money. Ironicus, in a lot of ways, seems like a very likely winner, but I think he's the wise guy horse, especially off that late run last out. So there's two long shots that I'm going to try and spice things up with. One is Jonathan's pet horse, What Have You, who, all things being equal, didn't run that poorly last out when he was in the 11 post and kind of caught wide on that first turn in the Shadwell Mile. Gets back to Santa Anita, where he loves the course, obviously. Does well at the flat mile, got the inside post. He may get the jump on them. Maybe he gets some pace pressure and folds. But for a horse that's so proven on this course and now taking a step up in class at a huge price, I like him. The other one that I like at a big price is Spectre. 3-year-old filly getting weight from everybody. Coming in some nice races in France. Always outruns her odds. I mean, you look at her odds in every one of those races in France, she runs better than what she's bet at. This is an interesting one. Marcus Munch, I know nothing about him, but I got to imagine he's not going to take the same money as Aidan O'Brien will. And it's interesting to me that he chooses to bring this one over and look who's aboard, Javier Castellano. Wouldn't be surprised if she runs big at a big price.
Specter's a very interesting filly. She's been really going up against older males for a couple of these most recent starts. She looks like she could be anything in here. Maybe a little bit light right now, but no reason to think she doesn't move up. Pete, where do you go in this spot?
I hate to anoint myself with the wise guy tag Mike was using on Ironicus, but that's one of the 2 bets I've made so far at the Breeders' Cup meeting via friends over in the UK. I took 10-1 on Ironicus. I just think he's clearly a horse who's been compromised by slow setups in the last 3 races. They are going to absolutely fly in here, as Jonathan had said, and I just think he's going to be flying late, and he's the one I want. All respect to Tepin. She owes the world nothing, and I think it'd be a little crazy not to try to save with her at least a little bit. I think Mike has an interesting long shot idea in Spectre, but most of my money here is going to be running through Ironicus.
Yeah, Ironicus is very, very logical. That big late kick we saw at Keeneland, same big late kick he delivered in all of his starts. It's just been a bit of an ouchie sort. So it's good that Sugar's got him all together. I'm looking at this race basically, and Pete and Jonathan, we've gone over this. I'm looking at it completely the opposite way. Just, you know what, we'll find out if I'm right or wrong on Saturday afternoon. I don't think Photo Call is that fast. I don't think What a View is quite the same horse that he was earlier in the year. I think Midnight Storm clears to the front from the outside, and he takes him a long way. Maybe he doesn't hang on to win, but I know at his best on the front can beat this field. I think Tepin is a supremely talented filly. She deserves all the accolades she's earned. I don't think she's come back the same since the trip over to Royal Ascot. That's not a knock. She can still obviously win this race, but I just want to take a shot against her at a short price. I'm going to go with Midnight Storm. Let's go on to the big one, the finale. It's the last race on Breeders' Cup weekend, the $6 million Breeders' Cup Classic. You have a field of 10 signed on in here, and all eyes are on the 4 California Chrome, the 10 Arrogate, Peter Thomas Fornatale. Is it as simple as a 2-horse race, or is there someone else that you need to use? And if it is a 2-horse race, which one?
I think it's a match race. I think they both have a chance. You put a gun to my head, I'm not going to get off the horse I thought was going to win this race for 6 months, and that's California Chrome. If you could give me $7, $8 on that exacta, I might just bet that and have it be more of a, bet a little to get the blood pumping a little more, but the blood will be pumping anyway. This race is just great sport. Can't wait to see it. Going to be a lot of fun Saturday night at Santa Anita.
Mike Hogan, where do you go?
Yes, it's a match race. I see California Chrome going out to the lead. I see Arrogate sitting off. I see them running 1-2 all the way around, and it looks a little bit like some of the races we've seen recently with California Chrome, but Arrogate is just playing the role of Dortmund here. I think probably if I play the race, it's going to be more just being alive in the pick 3s and pick 4s to California Chrome primarily and Arrogate more as a backup. I'll probably key them on top over some bigger prices underneath in the supers, such as Opportunity and Keen Ice, who I think both will just kind of run on. And we'll see what we can do. I'll kind of play against some of the other short price horses like Frosted and Melatonin, although I don't know how much Melatonin is going to take, but that's probably the way I'll approach the race.
Jonathan, what do you say?
Match race. Arrogate. Here's the thing. I look, if Chrome wins, I wouldn't be shocked. Don't get me wrong. But I just think that number was real. I think that figure was real. Gunrunner came back to run identical. My opinion about Arrogate is going to grow if Gunrunner runs well or runs back to his figure that he in the dirt mile. Then my opinion about Arrogate will grow there. I think Arrogate's going to clear. I think California Chrome's going to break, do the same thing he always does, what Victor does, is kind of keep him in that 4 path. Arrogate's going to have to go on with it. He just broke the track record, and the Travers on the lead. I don't see why they would rate him at Santa Anita. So for me, my ultimate selection here is going to be Arrogate. Obviously, I'll be using them equally, but for the sake of a pick, I'll use Arrogate. I did have a really interesting conversation. I'd love to get your guys' take on it, especially yours, Matt, because of your history with this horse. But I had someone whose opinion I really respect say to me that they believe that Frosted would win every race that he was eligible to enter in this Breeders' Cup except for this one, which is a lot of races, and it's very interesting. They did say probably not the 1.5-mile race, but every other race they felt like he would win if he ran in.
Oof, that's an interesting thought. I mean, look, I made no bones about it. I think he should have gone in the dirt miles. That's just my opinion. And I also don't look at that as a concession that they were just trying to duck the big horses. I don't know that he would have won that race. I think I've said to you guys, the Belmont race, the Met Mile, I said afterward, and I maintain it. I think that was the aha moment. He's a one-turn horse. He wants a mile. He could probably do 7 furlongs, I think. It's not to say he's incapable going longer distances. I just think he's a different animal going that one-turn mile. I'd love to see him, if he runs reasonably well here, I'd love to see him wheel back in 3 weeks and run in the Cigar Mile, because I think he would be a giant play in there, depending on odds, obviously. But look, I think he's a supremely talented animal. I don't think anybody's going to argue that. I just don't think 1.25 miles is his game. I think going shorter is better for this horse. Anyone else?
I would agree. Are they planning on the Pegasus for him at all?
I would think so. They have a slot. Doesn't Godolphin have a slot or no?
I don't remember.
I would imagine.
I would think so. I think he makes sense in there. And I think maybe he has a better shot against California Chrome in there than he does at Santa Anita at 10 furlongs. But, I don't know. He's certainly talented enough to prove me wrong. This is a horse who, just not even just that Met Mile has run some huge races. But I'm kind of with Matt. I mean, I don't think 10 furlongs is his best distance. And I know California Chrome and Arrogate are legitimate horses. And it's going to take a lot for him to beat one of those, let alone both of them.
I mean, I think I'm very curious. I'm sure it's somebody whose opinion I would respect too, but I don't get the idea of him winning the turf races based on the form that I see. I mean, and who's showing up in those. But I'd like his chances a lot better in the dirt mile, but I think he'd probably be just overbet there relative to the chances of a horse like Dortmund, who I think I would probably, not having handicapped the fictional race, obviously, but I think I'd still give preference to. I'm just trying to get my mind around the concept of him in the sprint if they'd go fast enough to let him get it done, or if he wouldn't need more ground. But he's a cool horse, and I'll just second everything everybody said about the idea of that sort of galloping mile around one turn. Seems like his attributes in that format are beyond impunity. And I don't know that maybe they would come back in 3 weeks, but I guess not if they're thinking Pegasus. So it's a little sad we won't get the opportunity to see what he could do at Aqueduct in November.
The pace scenario in this race is fascinating, and I'm just going to piggyback on what Jonathon said as far as kind of a jumping off point. I don't personally believe that Arrogate is going to clear off. I think California Chrome goes and Arrogate parks just off of his flank. And I just feel like, we talked a little bit about sort of different language yesterday as we were taping some things about the concept of a turn time. I think we're going to find out if it's run the way that I think it'll be run. I think we're going to find out really quickly going into the far turn if California Chrome has patented sort of separating move where he it appears as though he's quickening. He's not really quickening. It's just everyone else is starting to slow down. If he can separate from Arrogate, I think it may be over. Game, set, match. If Arrogate sticks with him, I think California Chrome's in a world of trouble because I have more faith in the way that Arrogate should finish than California Chrome. JK, agree or disagree?
Yeah, I just have a hard time, especially with Baffert and the way that Baffert is. I have a hard time seeing them rate Arrogate. I just feel like, like we said, he ran the biggest figure that I've seen on paper. Since I've been handicapping, he broke the track record at the Travers on what people say is a deep and tiring track. He went to the front there. I just don't see why he would do something different. And I don't believe that California Chrome, Victor Espinoza, and the Shermans want to be on the lead. I just think that it's kind of inherited the lead in the last 2 races, and they knew they were on the best horse, so they went on with it. It just feels like Arrogate is going to go to the front for me, and that's what I would expect is going to happen when they come past us for the first time.
See, I agree with Matt. And I think aside from the Travers, where he was on the rail and he was inside the other speed, he's never really shown blistering early pace before. And in fact, he sat off in most of his races. I would be, and maybe he's just not as fast early. In the case of the Travers was taking advantage of the situation a little bit. And even on that first turn, some of the other speed horses kind of went wide a little bit, allowed him to cut the corner and kick on and open up a little bit. I don't know if we're going to see that, especially against California Chrome, especially from the 10 post sitting outside of not just Chrome, but Melatonin, who's got some speed. Even FNX is going to be up there a little bit. I think agree with Matt, he kind of sits off a little bit, watches what the other horses do. I think by the backstretch, it's Chrome and Arrogate, and then completely agree with Matt. We'll see if he's able to quicken.
To Mike's point a little bit, though, look, I mean, I was trying to think of some clever analogy to make, and the best I could come up with is like in college, I used to take shots, right? Then I realized that that's not smart. I get too drunk and I get sick the next day. And I think the idea with Arrogate is they learned something about the horse. They got one of the best performances of the year with him being on the front end. So, yes, the rail probably influenced them learning about that, but now they know it, and it's Baffert. And he's won this race with a horse that couldn't warm up these two horses. And I don't see how in heck he's going to convince himself that he wants to sit off of a horse that he might not be better than, that he needs to pass. I think he's gonna tell Mike to go. It's in everyone's nature, in Mike's nature and in Baffert's nature to go on with it. I actually think that it's not even really a close discussion, in my opinion. I think that it's for sure he's going to be on the lead.
Further to that point, JK, you talk about personalities and what jockeys like to do. Couldn't you see if Victor gets that opportunity to not have to gun and he can just flop outside and be the hunter? Doesn't that just seem like the kind of trip, before these last couple where he was sort of in a position where he had to drill the field? Doesn't that seem like the kind of trip California Chrome wants and the kind of trip that the Shermans want Victor Espinoza to give? That, I guess we're 2-2 divided here on the show today.
It's going to be very interesting to see the tactics that are employed. And at the end of the day, I think we're all in agreement. This very much seemed like a match race. And hopefully we're set up for just a tremendous finish to Breeders' Cup weekend. We've got a little bit more as far as racing news is concerned. David O'Mara tweeted out, unfortunately, Soudois is not going to run Saturday in the turf sprint. He has a stress fracture. He'll be back next year, but he won't be running in the Breeders' Cup turf sprint. I mean, Lady Shipman draws in. She'll be going down the hill distance, maybe not her friend, but she's an intriguing addition to the race. Runner-up in the turf sprint last year down at Keeneland. Before we wrap things up, just kind of a quick whip around. Anything in particular that you guys are looking forward to playing, a race that's most intriguing to you, a certain wager that you're looking forward to? What is the big thing for you? Jonathon, obviously we know the Breeders' Cup betting challenge is first and foremost for you, but sort of aside from that, a race, a wager, anything in particular you guys are looking most forward to tomorrow and Saturday for the Breeders' Cup? Start with Jonathon.
On Friday, I'm excited about the opportunity to bet Beholder in her final race. I talked about it a lot, and with a lot of people just out and about, which is one of the funnest things about being able to come to these events is socially being able to interact with people about racing. And it's her last race. Mandela's going to have her cranked. He's not going to have anything. As conservative as I think he can be at times, there'll be nothing left in the tank with her. I think she'll be ready to rock and roll, and I'm excited to watch her run. And then I can't wait to bet our favorite named horse of the entire Breeders' Cup, Yellow, Agate. Can't wait to bet that horse. So I'm looking forward to those two spots, and what a 2 days of racing. I mean, it's there's not one race that I'm like, I don't really care. I want to watch them all, the sprint included. It's exciting, and I'm fortunate and lucky to be here.
Mike Hogan, what do you got?
I mean, it's tough because there's a lot of races where I think the most likely winners are going to be relatively short prices. So what I'll probably do for both days is try and get alive in the pick fours, culminating in the distaff in the classic. I'll try and be alive to Chrome primarily. Arrogate is a little bit of a backup, and maybe a couple really, really defensive plays in case chaos happens. But most likely, I won't go too heavy in any of that stuff. We'll be watching from a fan standpoint. And then certainly in the distaff, Alive to Stellar Wind and Beholder, playing against Songbird, and part of me as a racing fan rooting that I'm actually wrong, so that we can see what will have to be a super filly if she beats that field. So that's sort of my approach. As far as prices that I'm interested in playing, I really do like Spectre. May try and get her keyed up in the exactas with some of the others, including What a View. I like Midnight Storm as well, Matt. Just try and take some shots with some bigger prices that I think are likely to outrun their odds.
Peter Thomas Fornatale.
Probably the horse I'm the most excited in betting on the 2 days is Ironicus, as we talked about before. I could also see messing around in that late pick 4 might be a good way to get some action, starting off with the 4 European runners in the turf, getting skinny in the sprint, as I discussed before with Karina Mia and Have You Gone Away. Most of the money going through Ironicus, and then just play the big 2 on the end and have a little bit of a route. There's one thought to how I'm going to do it, but generally speaking, just looking for horses I like and betting them to win, and hoping to just enjoy a great 2 days of racing at this year's Breeders' Cup.
It really is. Seems like the culmination of the entire year. Maybe we have California Chrome in its biggest performance yet. Maybe we have Arrogate come through and back up another Travers effort. A lot of good things, exciting things on deck for the next 2 days. Tomorrow, Breeders' Cup Friday. Saturday, out Breeders' Cup Saturday. The biggest days as far as North American horse racing is concerned, and arguably 2 of the bigger days. The worldwide landscape, gentlemen, from the DR Players Podcast, Peter Thomas Fornatale, Michael Hogan, Jonathon Kinchen, thank you for coming on, being the guest. Appreciate it. Always good stuff. Anyone that's listening on Spreaker, this is the first time you've ever heard this show on Spreaker. I don't know that this will be something going forward, but once we get back to New York next week, next Friday, the Matt Bernier Show, no more time, about noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. That's usually when we roll, and I would imagine we'll get right back into it next week to recap everything that happens this weekend. Today's show brought to you by our friends at ExpressBet. ExpressBet, your way to play. It's certainly an exciting weekend, a lot of good things on deck. Look, if the Chicago Cubs can win the World Series in one of the greatest baseball games you'll ever see, anything can happen this weekend. Why can't you at home pick up a $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 score in a pick or anything along those lines? Best of luck this weekend. It's the Matt Bernier Show. Pete, I haven't been able to do this in quite some time. I'm going to throw it to you. Give us the sign-off.
I appreciate that very much, Matt. If you're playing this weekend, wherever you are, may you win all your photos. 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 Photos.